First, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Mallie Brossett. I'm coming to you live from sunny Athens, Georgia. I'm currently, I have been for the past few years, a PhD student at the University of Georgia studying international affairs. I also have a master's degree in international affairs from UGA, and as an undergrad, I got a bachelor's in political science with a minor in history. And also back when I was in high school, I took both these AP history exams, the AP US exam and the world exam. I got a 4 on the AP US exam. I got 5 on the AP world history exam. Both of those I put down to excellent teaching, but also just want to illustrate that I have the strategies and I do have the strategies and experience with this specific exam and its goals. And I hope to use that to kind of leverage and support you and your students or your students through this next process. Let's start with, the AP exam, the AP history exams. I'm going to be talking about them basically together because in the last few years, there's been a very strong push to standardize the AP history exams. So they all functionally have the same, although their content bases are different, they all functionally have the same goals. They focus on the same skills and they have the same internal structure and scoring mechanisms. So it's really easy to talk about them in conjunction. The goal of your standard kind of history course is usually just the memorization and recitation of facts. You may get some, you may get a story about how those facts fit together, but the primary goal is just learning the content. And that's understandable considering, for US history, you're covering 250 plus years of history. For in the old AP World History course, it was, all of recorded human history. The AP Modern course is 750 plus years of history. So there's always more content that could be included in the course. And that's why the goal of the AP history exams is often to go beyond just that memorization of facts, because there's too many, and it's develop these historical thinking skills. The big historical thinking skills that the AP exam focuses on are comparison, cause and causation, continuity and change, learning how to analyze a historical source, and then defending an argument with evidence. And these kinds of thinking skills are useful not just in the study of history, they're useful far beyond that one subject. I use these, and my background is more in political science, but I originally started out thinking I was going to be a history major. I use these skills all day long in my political science work, just being a citizen in a news consuming citizen in the United States, in a democracy these days. All of these are more necessary than ever to navigate the massive flow of information that's coming at us. In the same way that, a modern history subject, there's always more to learn. There's always more detail you could bring forward. In today's information saturated environment, there's always more information you can access. And learning how to sort through the information that's thrown at you and come up with plausible, defensible arguments based on evidence, to analyze sources, consider their reliability, and look for patterns, comparison, contrast, causation, continuity, and change. All of these things are very important to navigating the informational world that we live in today. With that in mind, my goal for these sessions is to practice these skills more so than reviewing the content, because hopefully you or your students have been getting this content all year long. But also, these skills are going to be the thing that is both useful to you in sorting through, on your exam, and also beyond the exam. My background is in social science. I'm always thinking one of the things that a side effect of getting a PhD is you think a lot about causal mechanisms. So my goal, my first instinct is always to take a step back, to think about the bigger picture. And so I want to take a few minutes with my time, rather than going through like a history lesson, to go through take a step back and consider kind of the way in which your brain functions, how it learns. And hopefully the information, not only because this information animates my choices when I'm thinking about how to structure my course, but also because, if you're on this line, you are someone in your life is a little over a month going to be trying to take a big test. And hopefully some of these tips will be useful to you, even if you don't end up taking my course, in preparing for that big task of memory retrieval. So to take this, bearing in mind, I'm not a brain scientist, I'm not a psychologist. This is kind of a very surface level treatment of how the brain learns, but hopefully it's useful for understanding the strategies I'm going to put forward in just a second. So one, your brain encodes memory as connections between motor neurons in your brain. So anytime you store a new idea in your head, a new fact in your head, that is a new possible thing to connect to. And the more you use that information and the more sort of associations you make to it, then the more connections are forged in your brain and the more likely you are to remember that information, to be able to recall it. So your goal when you study, when you're trying to learn a new skill, this goes beyond just preparing for an exam, practicing. This goes with physical skills like practicing instruments. It also works with any kind of knowledge or content you want to build, learning a language, all the same, is to build those active connections. You want to pick up information in different contexts, use it in different ways, and that will make it easier and make it stick more. So the first kind of strategy that utilizes this active connection you can use, and with one you're probably familiar with, is testing yourself. When you test yourself, not only do you establish what you do know and what you don't know and identify what you need to work on, just from like a practical standpoint, but do you see something called the generation effect? Testing yourself before you've even begun to study the material stimulates creative thinking in your brain, stimulates knowledge retrieval, stimulates areas of your brain that you are going to need in order to receive new information. So if you take the way they test this in studies is you take a pre-test on information you haven't studied before, and then you study the information and you take a post-test. And people who take the pre-test tend to do better than people who just start studying. So practicing the act of trying to recall, trying to think creatively, trying to make guesses based on patterns, all of these things are ways you can help prepare your brain for learning and help make that learning stick. Another thing, due to the hypercorrection effect, you make more connections around information you get wrong, maybe because you're embarrassed that you get it wrong, or because you feel the disappointment of having gotten the question wrong. And because you have these more connections, you are more likely to remember that information going forward. So because of both of these kinds of psychological effects, testing yourself is a sound strategy for trying to build knowledge. The most famous and the one you probably are all already using is flashcards. You can set up a study situation where you take 5 minutes. Using flashcards, they're a classic because they work. Another way you might stimulate this in a testing environment is taking 5 minutes to do a brain dump and write down everything you can remember about a particular topic without your notes, and then go back and review your notes and correct the things you've written down. That stimulates a similar kind of environment. For the specifics of history, the things you want to be looking out for when you're making a good history flashcards, we don't really have formulas, we don't really have laws or rules, but we do have the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, and why it matters are things you're thinking about. Thinking about what happened, an event, if you're thinking about an event, what happened, what changed, what did the subject accomplish, what people were directly involved, what roles did they play, who was affected, the date if possible, though the advantage of the AP history structure is dates are less important, but knowing the relationship between events, if something came before or something came after, can help you narrow that down too. And then, if you can make other events and concepts connect between different things, that's always a strong entry into a good history flashcard. Strategy 2, spacing. So intuitively, we sort of think of our memory as decaying over time. It's like you put a book on a shelf, and then over time, the pages begin to decay, and the file begins to fall apart, and it's just not there and as much as it used to be. That's not really how it works. Really, the thing that actually decays over time is your ability to access that memory. So once memory is encoded, it's there. Our just capacity to access it was what degrades over time. So if access is the question, then the most efficient strategy for trying to recall that memory is forcing ourselves to recall it when we're on the point of forgetting it. When we have to do the most learning work, then we build that recall muscle in our brains and make more connections to refresh that memory. So over time, increasing the gap between repetitions allows you to spend less time on a particular concept while maximizing that memory benefit. They call this this idea that you are that this is based in some sense on something we all kind of do when we've been presented with new information. They might call it spontaneous activation or spontaneous recall. You kind of like you're suddenly in the shower and you suddenly start thinking about this new fact you learned the other day, and that helps and is the process of helping your brain to encode that memory. So you want to create situations in which you can foster that kind of spontaneous activation, that spontaneous recall, because that's going to make it easier for you to retain that information in the long run. For the study strategy that goes with this is to set a specific time to review old notes and concepts from previous months, spending the majority of your time focusing on older stuff and then adding in new stuff. There's also a strategy that you can use with your flashcards. If you're already using things like Quizlet or Anki digital flashcards, those systems have this technique built into them, this kind of spacing technique built in, but you can do this with your own with physical flashcards. You can set up your boxes, your piles into different sets, and then make a plan to review those flashcards on this kind of timetable where you review the first box every day, review the second box every other day, the third box once a week, the fourth box once every other week, and the fifth time you get it correct, it goes into the retired box. And every time you get a card wrong, it goes back to the beginning. Every time you get a card right, it moves up. And this is a simple way of just kind of like physically building in that spacing system into your practice. And you can also change the intervals to suit your weekly study sessions, or you guys have a little over a month between now and your exam. So you could set up a scenario in which you're doing, you're maybe adding in a new unit every week, or you're spacing these intervals out a little bit more. This seems like a pretty good interval for when you're a month out from an exam. So using this interval structure, if you started tonight with your first set of flashcards, and you kept doing this all the way up till exam day, you'd be in a really strong position to do well on the exam. So strategy 3 is interleaving, mixing different subject areas and skills in practice instead of just repeating the same things together. In mathematics, this looks like considering different kinds of problem sets alongside each other. In kind of more physical skills-based practice, it looks like practicing similar physical skills together. And history, this would be the historical version of this is like taking the same content, but considering it from different perspectives, using different historical skills. Maybe I'm trying to help myself remember the events of the American Revolution. So one day I'm going to do practice where I look at comparing and contrasting different aspects of, maybe the bills leading up to the various acts and offenses leading up to the American Revolution. One day I'm going to spend time thinking about it in terms of continuity and change. One day I'm going to spend time going, okay, looking at sources from the period and analyzing them, or trying to build an argument to answer a sample question that I might see on the exam. And all of those, using those different those historical thinking skills in different ways to study the same material can help build more of those active connections that we've been talking about. And that adds difficulty to practice, which helps you build more active memory. The final strategy is strategy 4, elaboration. This is something that a lot of people who do really a real on a subject kind of tend to do naturally. You ever kind of been, thinking about things in a shower, or you learned something in class and you go home and it was really cool, so you take it home and you try to explain it to a relative or a friend, or you try to synthesize all the things you've heard into a kind of a story. Or when I was teaching AP US history, US history at the undergraduate level in college as a TA, the instructor used to have her students make memes at the end of class as a way of demonstrating their historical understanding. That was also a kind of elaboration, the idea of the see one, do one, teach one method, the idea that you are not just passively receiving the knowledge, but you are taking the knowledge and doing something with it and helping to convey that information to other people. And when you are thinking about the information you are learning, you're thinking about it and practicing with it, how you would explain it to others, you are building more of those active connections. So, you could explain things like you're telling a story to your grandma, making memes, explaining it like it's a recap or an episode of a TV show you really like, sorting key terms and concepts into piles. These are all ways of kind of building in active elaboration into your study practice. Now, the reason I've been talking about all of this, one, is because we have these thinking skills that we need to be working on, but also because my goal is to hopefully build all of these elements into the structure of my course. These are some more study ideas. If you want to see those in the question and answer section, I'll be happy to go over them. But each week, my goal is to have spend about an hour reviewing content from kind of bigger picture perspective. These big picture perspectives, when you're in a history course and you're looking at it, you look at it in terms of units. So, in American history, you start with, before colonization, and then you look at colonization, and you look at the American Civil War, and you kind of, you're looking at it in chunks of time. So my goal is to kind of take a big step back, look at the bigger picture across the entire length of the course, and looking at one of the major themes that the AP, the College Board, has set out for the history, the kinds of things and things they're likely to bring out in terms of maybe a longer essay or that longer perspective. So in the AP US history, that might look at, let's take a look at all developments regarding women and family and women's roles in society, and gender that might be relevant to the discussion. What events can we pull out and what patterns can we look for? It might be things like economics and the labor movement in the AP world era. It might be looking at trade and technological change over the entire window, looking at patterns of nation building, colonialism, nationalism, imperialism, or looking at things like human rights and religion. Each week we'll look at a different theme, try to get that big picture perspective, also build in some active recall, prompting students to remember events they've already learned about and put them in perspective. Each week there'll also be an activity designed to practice a skill necessary for your success on the exam. I've got some ideas for games and things we can do. Obviously, week 2 will be practicing analyzing historical documents. So actually spend some time getting in the weeds with particular documents, asking ourselves questions and things like that. Each week there'll also be a review of one section of the exam, skills and tips to be successful in those particular areas. What are the criteria that the judges are looking for? And then at the end, after the session is over, you'll get a chance to practice using your content knowledge in multiple ways. By one, demonstrating, historical skill, and also by going through in your homework and doing a portion of a practice exam. So by the end of the course, ideally, you will have done an entire practice exam's worth of material. So I haven't made decisions on all of the content areas and when they'll be covered yet, but the basic structure for the kind of skills and then what the homeworks will be, I have decided on. So week 1, It will be patterns of historical reasoning, correlation, causation, and continuity and change. And then homework, you'll be doing focused on multiple choice questions. Week 2, it'll be all about analyzing historical documents, and then we'll be focused on the short answer section of the test. Week 3 will be all about thesis statements and organizing arguments and outlining essays, and then we'll be focused on the long essay question. And then week 4, we'll be looking at using historical documents as evidence, and we'll be focused on the document-based question. Probably one of the hardest parts of the overall exam. But yeah, and also I know the other thing that you'll get in addition to spending about an hour a week, some weeks of this it's less than an hour. Most of the time it's less than an hour, but the multiple choice week is the longest because you need the full 55 minutes to do 55 practice questions. In addition to that, I'll be doing the question a day, which will be designed to kind of, practice. Maybe I'll give you a prompt and you might have to write a thesis statement, or I might give you a source and might ask you to point out 3 things about it, or I might give you a prompt and like ask you to pick which source. I might ask you to make a meme, who knows? But there'll be different activities, short, usually take about 5 minutes, and that are designed to prompt you to think about some aspect of this process, build in that active recall, and practice one of these skills that you're going to need to be successful on the exam.